Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Modern Functional Test Automation Through Visual AI, with Head of Test Automation University, Raja Rao. A quick intro about our speaker. Raja Rao is the Senior Director of Growth and Content at Applitools, as well as the Head of Test Automation University. In 22, Raja got his master's in computer science from UI-UC and went on to become a QA automation engineer lead, front-end developer, and developer advocate. Prior to his position at Applitools, Raja worked at Yahoo and Salesforce. Raja joined Applitools in 2018 and since then helped build Test Automation University. So I think it's best to let him speak now. Raja, the stage is yours.
All right, thanks, Adi. Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Raja Rao, and thanks for joining. And I'm pretty sure that you're going to find this course very interesting, and at the very least, it's going to make you think your current approach. So in this course, what I'm going to do is, throughout this course, I'm going to compare the modern functional testing versus the legacy or the traditional way of doing functional testing. You may be using Selenium, Cypress, or any other testing tools. So we'll still be using those things in the modern functional testing as well. But in addition, we are going to replace some of the traditional way or the legacy way of doing things with what is known as visual AI, and that uses computer vision and advanced algorithms and so on, and dramatically enhances your productivity as a QA engineer. So, and in my mind, I always kind of call this as a legacy way. Mainly because I used to be a QA engineer, 15 years ago, and then and after that I moved on and became like a developer advocate, and also went into marketing. And what I've noticed in the last 12 years, 15 years is that in all these places, technology have dramatically, has improved dramatically. So you cannot, for example, bring the skills that you had in 2008, 2009 into any of these departments and then get a job in these departments, because now they all use different tools, they all use different technologies, and they all have different requirements now, and things move so fast in all this environment. And when it comes to QA, when I came back to Applitools, what I noticed was that was not happening. Things are more or less the same. There are some differences, some enhancements, but definitely not anywhere near what you would find in the developer world, in the DevOps world, in the marketing world, or any other parts of the of a typical software company. And it's not because the QA folks and the people in the QA industry has not been trying it. They've been trying to solve. It's just a different problem. It needs a more dramatic solution. And a lot of people have tried it, where they try to use DOM-diffing as a solution and comparing screenshots using pixel by pixel and whatnot over the years. It's not like a new idea. But in all these ways, where you are using either DOM-diffing or you're using the pixel by pixel comparison, where you take screenshots and you compare them, all of them have failed because because the problem is just too hard. And what you kind of need is something that compares like a human. And the only thing that is closest to that is an artificial intelligence thing. And thanks to the advancement in technology, you can now finally use it. And that's basically what I'm going to show you in this entire webinar. You see, all right, next page. So let's take an example before we go ahead, and let me talk about how a typical traditional or a legacy test would look like. So the test case here is that you have this simple login page, and the test case is if you don't enter your username and password, and if you click on this sign in button, you should see this error message. Now, please enter username or password. And in addition, you also need to make sure all these fields and all these checkboxes and all these buttons, they all exist. Okay, so that is the test case. Now, if you look at the actual code of how you would write it, so this is a Selenium Java code. So let's go through this code line by line so you understand exactly what's going on here. So the first line is basically uses Selenium to open the app itself, and the second line uses again Selenium to click on the login button, right? So you have a line of navigation code and line of button click code. But then afterwards, all these 16 lines of code are all about validation. They are all checking if the this field exists, if this button exists, and if this label exists, if this icon exists, and whatnot. So there are a lot of things here. Although it's a very simple page, there's still a lot of artifacts here. So, and all these, all these validation code are all checking if all those little things exist or not. So the problem here is not just it's not really the lines of code, okay? And in your typical, in your typical environment, you may not write it as part of a single test like this, but you still write it as part of multiple tests, and the number of lines are going to be somewhat similar or maybe even more. But the main issue here is not the lines of code. The main issue is what's in it. So now if you look inside it, you're going to see that a lot of these lines uses locators, right? It's like IDs, XPaths, and whatnot that can all change. So in this code, in this set of code, there are like 14 of them, and all of them can change, and you have no control over it, right? So developer can decide to change it for whatever reason, and you are going to run your test, and then suddenly you are going to see a failure, and it's a false positive for you, and then you're going to go and spend time maintaining it and fixing it. It's just a vicious cycle. And the same thing happens with the hard-coded labels and text that you may need to compare. Again, this usually happens because your product manager says, hey, you know what? We need to change this text from please enter username and password to something else completely. So, oops. So something else completely. So what happens is, again, you're going to end up having a lot of false positives, and this happens all the time. Especially if you are maintaining like hundreds of tests, there will always be 10 tests or 15 tests that constantly have this problem, right? Because the main reason is your application changes. It's not like you build the app and the app continues to remain exactly the same, because developers sitting right next to you are just like you are working the whole day, and then they're making changes to the app, right? So there is no way you can write something and then make it work all the time. Now, with all this code, I'm going to quickly show you how the modern testing code looks like. But the main idea of the modern way is this. So if you have an application that is, let's say the login page, which is in the state 1, and you perform some action. So in this case, click on the login button, and then it goes to the next state where your login page has an error, right? So this is the second stage. So anytime you want to verify your verify a functionality using the modern way, all you do is you take a screenshot at stage 2. Okay, so irrespective of what the use case is, right? It could be adding an item to a cart, in which case you use Selenium to add an item to the cart and then take a screenshot. Okay, so irrespective of what the use case is, you use that. So this is the primary pattern of this whole modern testing. Okay, and what you do is every time you run the test, you keep taking the same screenshots, but then you compare it, the new screenshot, with the previous test screenshots. Okay, and then but if you're using just pixel by pixel, then you are going to have lots of problems, because pixel by pixel has been known, comparison has been known to be prone to all sorts of issues, because even if a small pixel changes, it's going to say the login functionality itself is failed. So it's going to be it's actually a lot more problematic than the locators that you've been using. And the other option you have, you can use here in this pattern, is the DOM-based comparison, where you take a snapshot, you save the DOM at stage 2 over here, and then again run the same test tomorrow, and then compare the again take a copy of the DOM and compare the copy of the DOM with the previous version of the DOM, and then see if there is any difference. If there is any difference, then you are going to say, oh, there is a problem, so that means this login functionality is broken, right? Again, as you could imagine, DOM changes all the time, right? And it's a lot more fluid and a lot more dynamic than the page itself. So again, that also gives you lots and lots of false positives. So now the modern way that we are talking about is essentially don't use the DOM, because it's extremely fluid, it's extremely problematic. But instead take the screenshot. But then again, don't compare screenshots using pixel by pixel comparison, because again, that causes lots of problems. Because even if it's a small thing like an anti-aliasing, or the way the things are rendered, if there's a small change, you're going to see that the two screenshots are different, which means you're going to feel like, at least your testers are going to say the functionality itself is broken, right? So it's not reliable. So instead, what we are saying is you take screenshots, but you compare them using computer vision, using AI, and that's basically what I'm going to talk to you in this whole course. So the idea is you, for any kind of test case you can think of, you perform the test, you perform the actions or the navigation or data entry to go to the second state, and over there you take a screenshot, and then you compare that using an AI. So the AI, in this case, is the Aptitudes AI, the EYES AI, which is being trained with billions of images. So it knows exactly what to highlight as differences and what to ignore. Okay, so because of that, it's very, very simple for you to see if the difference is because of a feature difference or if it is because of a bug, right? Because we highlight exactly what the issue is. So that's the main difference here when I say modern functional testing using visual AI, which is, the idea itself is not new. People have been trying this thing for a long time. But what you're going to see is using this approach, you're suddenly going to not even have to write a lot of tests, because in the previous way, for every single DOM element that you need to check, you need to write a line of code, right? But in the modern way, you no longer have to do it, because you can take a screenshot of the entire page and then check the entire thing in one shot, right? Okay, so hopefully as long as you're kind of following, I'm assuming, I'm going to go further and then show you the actual code, how it's going to look like. So this is the code with the visual AI added to it. So basically, you're still using Selenium for navigation and button click, because we cannot do navigation using Aptitudes or any other tool. But what you do is you replace all your validations into and use our SDK where it can take a screenshot. Okay, so what this is doing here is it's simply saying over here, it's simply saying that, hey, Aptitudes, please take a screenshot of my login page. That's not what it's doing. Now, if you compare this with the previous version, you can see the validation code is essentially come down to 3 instead of 16, right? And more importantly, the number of locators that you are depending on is come down to 1 instead of 14, right? So this is, and the time that it takes to write this is literally like 2 minutes. And the fun thing that you're going to notice is, for most of the tests that you are going to use, that you're going to write in this approach, are going to be exactly like this, where you're going to simply navigate to a page, and then you take a screenshot. And that's pretty much all your tests are going to look like. So there's not going to be a complex, algorithm or anything else involved, or you don't need to have a very deep understanding of a programming language in order to do something. No, so it makes the whole writing code itself very, very simple, and also debugging it very simple. So let's imagine that, in the previous login page, a new version of the app came out, right? So where these are all the changes it had. The first one is there is a real bug here where the image is missing, the logo is missing here, and then there is a visual bug where the please enter your username and password exists, but it is not shown over here correctly. It's kind of moved up, and it is kind of there is a visual problem here. And then your placeholder text all have changed because for whatever reason, and there is a new terms and conditions feature has been added. So now there are total up to 5. There are actually total 5 differences in this page. So this is a new version. So now if you take the code that I wrote earlier and then run the same test against the new build, this is the result that you're going to find. First of all, the real bug that the logo is missing is actually escaped, because although I was kind of focusing on all these forum fields, which happens all the time. When you're given a task, you won't really obviously check every single piece of the code, right? So there'll always be some pieces you say, oh, that won't change, or you kind of take a decision where some parts you don't bother to test. And if that breaks, then then you're going to go and then add it, or kind of look bad on you. So anyway, so in this case, the real bug has escaped, and the visual bug also has escaped, because you are just checking the DOM for the existence of this text. You are not checking for whether this banner actually exists in this exact location or not. So that's another false positive. I mean, another thing that's escaped. Now you actually caught these two placeholder texts because you had written tests for those things, but you missed this new feature existence. So When somebody adds a new feature or a new button into some in the login page or some other page in your app, sometimes it may take weeks for you to know, because your written test, you think everything is good, but you never know that there was a new feature was added again, and that kind of causes delay in making sure that the quality of that specific feature is being tested properly, right? So in this case, because you are not checking for this, that feature, the new feature has been missed. And then there is also one false positive. Again, the issue here is that because of this link, our terms and conditions link, the XPath of the Twitter button has moved. So because of that, you basically, when you run the test, you're going to see that Twitter is missing or Facebook button is missing. One of them is missing, and then you're going to be like, uh-oh, what's going on? And then you spend time to figure out what's going on, and then you'll see that this thing has cause your test to fail or give you false positive, right? So these are all kind of very realistic examples that you'll find in a day-to-day basis. Now, let's see what happens when you run the same thing using visual AI. So let me go to the next page. So you can see this GIF here. So what this is showing is a GIF of before and after within aptitudes. So what it is showing is it's kind of, as you can see here, like everything is been highlighted. All the differences have been highlighted appropriately, right? So if imagine that if I showed you ran a test and this is the result that you got, and then immediately you can immediately see that, oh, there is a bug here, there is a bug here, and these things have changed. There's a new feature here. It's very easy for you to analyze it, right? It literally takes probably like 10 seconds for you to know why something is broken, right? As opposed to going back into the code and then debugging that and rerunning the test and whatnot, right? So this is the benefit that you're going to get when you're using when you're doing functional testing using visual AI. Right, so it's very, very visual, and as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So when you see a picture, and especially where things are highlighted appropriately, just like a human would do when you ask them to do spot the difference or something, it's very, very easy for you, right? So going forward, if you use something like this, it becomes, you can imagine, like it's not rocket science. It just makes it easier for you to add something like Aptitools or some other tool that does this. Now, again, just to analyze what's going on here, if you add up all these things, you can see that when you compare legacy versus visual AI is basically 8 times better. Again, depending, this thing can change depending on the page you are testing and the way you have written tests. But the reality is not far from this. Especially, remember, like this is a very simple page that we are testing. So if you were to test much more complicated page, things may be even dramatically higher, right? And so that's how it works. So now let's continue on and understand the cost of maintenance. So now that you had all these issues, so ultimately that's not the end of the story. The story continues, where you need to maintain all these things. So in order to fix the real bug that escaped, so you need to add a new test. So that's, let's say, take another 15 minutes for you to do it. And in order to fix the visual bug, you need to figure out the CSS and why that is happening, and make sure the CSS attributes are all correct. And that's another 15 minutes. It may even take 30 minutes, because CSS and all those things are pretty hard. So, and then update the enhancements due to where the placeholder text were different. That's another 10 minutes. And then new feature has been added, so you may need to add another test. That's another 5 minutes. And false positives. Again, you need to figure out why the things have been, why you're getting false positives, and then you kind of need to go back and update the XPaths of the previous one, and also the new previous link and the new link. It's all going to take at least 15 minutes. So you could imagine that this whole thing, just to maintain it conservatively, or at least at the very least, it will take you 60 minutes. It may actually take like 2 hours if you're new, or if you or if there is if your app is more complicated. But on the other hand, in the visual AI, you will see soon it basically takes 2 seconds, because we'll provide a button where you can simply go and then do a thumbs up if it is a feature, or thumbs down if it is a bug. So it's pretty simple for you to do it, and more importantly, you can immediately see what's going on, right? So there's a dramatic difference there. So now again, to compare the cost, so for test development and test maintenance cost, at least for this use case, it's like 18 times faster. So it may just be like 5 times faster for you, or 3 times faster for you. It depends on the application, but for this one, that's how it is. And the number of bugs found, again, 8 times more bugs, and the test stability cost, again, because we are not using locators, or at least we are trying to minimize it, it's going to be like 20 times more stable. And the way I'm counting it is simply count the number of locators you are depending on, and the less locators you're depending on, the better it is for you, right? So now, again, if imagine you're testing a more complex page like this one. So now imagine what would have happened, right? If you were to write the code the traditional way or the legacy way, you have to write so much code to validate if all these things exist, if all these, this little number exists, all these buttons exist, and they all are displayed at the exact position and whatnot, right? So it's a lot of work. Now with the modern way, you simply take a screenshot. So that's pretty much the pattern, and that's pretty much the theme of this webinar as well. And just so you know, like we, internally at Applitools, and also personally myself, we think this is the future, right? Whether you use Applitools or not, this is how you're going to write the tests in the future. In the next 2-3 years, you are no longer going to be writing the way you're writing today. You're going to use some tool. It could be Applitools, it could be some other tool, where you're going to take screenshots and then you're going to compare them, using some kind of an AI technology, right? Because that is the easiest way. And this is what, this is not something that is dramatic. This is like what happens in all the other departments of your company. So all these companies, if you look at marketing, or if you look at sales, or developers, they use lots of tools. They just don't use the just whatever the open source tools comes out, right? So they use lots of tools, and whatever makes them productive, they want to use those things, right? So the same way QA will also, we think that, are going to start using tools. You're probably already using some tools. You're going to use more tools to make yourselves productive. So one other interesting thing here I want to highlight is that the reason this thing works is because essentially Visual AI is functional testing through Visual AI is a superset of legacy functional testing, because every time you do you use use Visual AI and you take screenshots, right? Pretty much all the, it always include all the functionality, because all the functionality you can think of, they always have a visual aspects associated with them, right? So if you, for example, logging in, that has a visual aspect, which is you go to the application page. If you add a product to your cart, then the product needs to be present in the cart, right? So again, you can visually see the end result. So because of that, this thing actually works. And pretty much, the idea is that you can pretty much replace almost all of your functional tests that you're currently doing to a screenshot based to a visual AI based testing. Okay, so it's basically what this thing is doing. So now I want to kind of take a second and then kind of talk to you about some of the differences between the legacy and the modern testing, mainly the tech stack. The first one is the browser automation. So in the browser automation, what kind of tools you use. So there is no difference here. So you can continue to use your Selenium, Cypress, Test Cafe, and whatnot. So because we ultimately need you to navigate to the point where you can take screenshots. And then test frameworks, again, you can use this existing test framework, whatever you're using. So there is no difference there either. Assertion libraries is where the main difference happens. So instead of using Chai and other assertion libraries where you are kind of asserting a lot of individual elements, you use Applitools Visual AI. So now this gives you all these benefits, but the other benefit that you may not have seen is may not have recognized is that instead of writing, let's say, 10 tests to check different parts of a single page, now you can just take a screenshot of the entire page, right? So suddenly you are not even navigating, going to that page and checking a small piece. You're just going to that page and taking the entire page screenshot. So now suddenly the number of code that you write comes down dramatically. I mean, number of tests itself comes down dramatically. It's not like, but if you're writing 100 tests earlier, you're going to continue to write 100 tests now, only with less code. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be like, if you're writing 100 tests previously, you are probably going to write like 25, 30 tests, and even those 30 tests, the number of lines of code will be like just a couple of lines of code, as opposed to 10, 20 lines of code in each of the tests in the previous case. In the test running infrastructure, there's really no change at all. Again, if you are running on different clouds, you can continue to run. And we also provide at Amplitude something called as a visual grid. We call it ultra fast grid now. So that also you can run your tests in visual grid as well. The main difference is that if you're using our visual grid, the screenshots are taken in the cloud. So you can run the test wherever you are, but ultimately the SDK will simply upload the DOM snapshot to our grid, and then our grid is going to then open the entire DOM snapshot or the entire HTML in different form factors in different browsers, and then take screenshots in that grid and then send those screenshots to our ICE server, to our AI server for comparison purposes. So because of that, if you were to use this, you are going to see dramatically faster performance. Now, again, the ecosystem support, there is no difference at all. I mean, you can, if you're already using Jenkins or Jira, GitHub, you can kind of continue to use it. And the other education community, we provide Test Automation University, which is a completely free university for education platform for you to go and then educate yourself and upskill yourself. And by the way, we now are close to like 30,000 QA engineers on the platform. So, and also note that it has like 30 different courses. So if you've never been to Test Automation University, I highly recommend you to check it out, because all the courses that are taught over there are all done by some really well-known industry leaders in QA industry. So you're going to get a really high-quality education. Okay, so hopefully you got an idea about what the differences are and why things are going to be different in the modern approach. So again, I'm just going to quickly go over the benefits. So the benefits are, number one, in the test creation phase, fewer tests, and then quicker to write tests because you don't need to search for locators and so on. Now, test maintenance phase, first of all, you'll have fewer tests to begin with, and then fewer test breaks. So the test maintenance phase is going to be relatively simpler and relatively quick. And then easy to update tests if the UI changes. I'm going to show you how this works in a bit. But the main thing is, if your UI changes because of a new feature, Amplitude is going to show you a difference. It says, oh, I found this new button, which was not there in the previous image, which is the baseline image. And then all you need to do is to simply go there and then do a thumbs up. And then basically what it does is it's going to take the new screenshot with this new feature as a baseline. So going forward, any other test, anytime you run the test, the future screenshots will be compared with this new baseline. So again, all you need to do to maintain it, you just need to do a thumbs up. So now think of it this. Think of a scenario where your development team is building a new feature or a new product. So then all you need to do is to ask them for a little bit of navigation, IDs for the navigation things, so you can navigate to those pages, and then you start taking screenshots. And every time they make change to their product, because it's still under development, all you do is you go and then you do a thumbs up in our dashboard. When you do a thumbs up, it's a little button and it automatically updates the baseline. So now what it means is you can finally automate while your application is still being developed, which is kind of not, it's kind of unheard of, right? So you can actually automate pretty much most of it while the thing's being developed. So you don't need to wait for the blessing from the product manager or the developer manager to tell you that, hey, the product is now ready, QA guys, please go and then add automation now. So you don't need to do that. You can just do it along with that. So that means you can find bugs quickly, you can you already have the automation thing done by the time the product is done. So you have all these kind of advantages that you can get if you start using this approach. Now again, bugs reported. I'm not going to. I already talked about all these things. So the main thing is that if you want to report bugs, I'm going to show you in a bit. It's pretty simple to report a bug using AppleTools, because we kind of provide a very integrated dashboard where you can simply mark the section where the bug exists, and then you can file it as a bug. Okay, so now let me change my screen. I want to kind of show you some code, and then I'm going to show you some realistic examples. Okay, so here is a SAP HANA application. Okay, so as you can see, this is a very more realistic application. And here, the test case here is, there are a couple of tests. One is you need to make sure if all the details on this entire list shows up correctly, which means you need to somehow figure out if these pictures are displayed correctly, if the availability status is displayed correctly, and if the green color and this orange color and this red color, all these colors are all displayed correctly. So there are a lot of things in each of these items, and this is a big long list. So you need to make sure all these items in the list actually shows up. Okay, so let's just take that is one example number one. That's test one number one. And the second one is you need to make sure this right side thing also shows up correctly. All the details all show up correctly. Okay, and the other thing is if you select an item and then if you add an item to the cart, and then if you go to the cart, then you should be able to see that item in the cart. Okay, so it's another test. So these are, let's take these three tests, but there is a curveball here. The curveball is that every time you let me go back here. So every time I refresh this, this carousel actually changes, and these promoted items also change, because these are like completely, they kind of randomly refresh it every time someone goes in. So you can't really easily test this thing, right? So now look at this. So now this one is different. So if I move something here, I think it's like after like every few minutes it changes the home page. So anyway, so how do you actually test this? So you don't need to think about it. So I'm going to show you the code that I wrote for this specific test. I'm hoping that you can see it. Let me see. Let me make it a little bit bigger. So the code here that I have commented out, let me uncomment them so you can see this. All right. Okay, so here is the legacy code, and here is the way you would have written, if you were to ask to write all those tests. So first of all, you will have, obviously you need to find the first item. Let's just say you want to check this, all these items. So let's say you want to test, you want to check if all these things exist in this specific item. So what you would do is you would obviously go to the DOM and then see if if all these items exist. See. Okay. If all these items exist, and also notice that the ID itself is so verbose. Everything is super verbose, right? It's not easy to see. And the another thing that you need to note here is that the IDs themselves are actually dynamic, right? So this thing can be 1, this thing can be 2. Although they are supposed to be unique, they're just unique, but they're not. They can be dynamic, okay? So this can change all the time. So again, so the more you depend on that kind of a locator, the worse it can be for you as a QA engineer, right? So here I'm finding selecting the first item, and then I'm asserting, if the item's label exists, if the item's price is accurate. I'm kind of copying the price, I'm copying the text, and I'm again copying this text here to check if the availability exists, to check if the green color for the availability exists. So again, this is the line for that, where I'm kind of going and then finding the CSS class, and then making sure that if the CSS class actually has this string in it and whatnot. So again, so as you can see, this is a pretty gnarly piece of code, right? So now this is just for one item. I have to again repeat the same thing for all the different items. So we may say, let's not test all the items. Let's just make sure we test like 3 or 4 items, but you'll still need to do a lot of code to just test 3 or 4 items, to ensure that they all actually look correct and then they all are displayed properly. And then here is another thing, another similar test to add an item, to add an item to the cart. So this is another test. So I have written a bunch of tests where this one basically selects an item and then adds the item to the cart, opens the cart, and then once the item is in the cart, it then looks into all the different aspects of the item inside the cart. So basically it checks if I go back to the cart here. So it checks if all these, this text exists, this availability exists, this link exists and whatnot inside this cart, right? So that's how the code would look like. And as you could imagine, it's very, very fragile because every single line of code has these very dynamic locators, and they can change very easily. And the worst part with this specific thing is this thing is based on SAP HANA UI5 framework, and that's not even built by your own company, or it's built by SAP, right? So you may be in a situation where you are testing some application that is built by that's using some proprietary framework like SAP or Salesforce Lightning, or IBM's they have their own framework. So all these companies have their own frameworks. So you may be in trouble because you can't even go and talk to your developers to fix all this thing or to make it easy for you, right? And in many of the modern frameworks like React and Vue, even in those cases, the developers may not actually provide you with IDs, right? So the less number of IDs that you can depend on, the better it is, right? So that's the mantra. So ideally we don't want to depend on anything, but unfortunately the reality is you still need to depend on some of them. So instead of depending on, let's say, 15, 20 of them, if you manage to somehow only depend on 2 or 3 of them, then your tests are that much better. So now let me go to the modern way, and then I'm going to show you what the code looks like. So you can see here, almost all the tests do the same thing. And the first one is simply, this is an API within Applitools to create a test within Applitools. So you're saying, hey, Applitools, create a test called product list, and the image's screen size, the viewport size should be 1600 by 800. And we need to provide this because we want to make sure that the screenshot is of the exact size every single time. So otherwise, when you open the browser, it may open up in different size, and you may get different result. So we always need to provide the viewport size that we want. And then we're going to say, okay, now that you're here, find this ID. So this is an ID for the for this list. So we go back here. So that ID is for this entire list that has this scroll bar. And so basically what we're saying is, okay, find that element that has the scroll bar, and this .fully, what this does is it scrolls down this entire list, and it takes screenshots while it is scrolling. With the Applitools SDK is going to take screenshot of these individual sections, and then it stitches all of them, and then creates a screenshot of this entire list, entire long list, right? So, and then it uploads it into our server. And the same thing for the right-hand side as well. The next test also does the same thing. Basically, instead of this list, it's going to scroll to the right-hand side pane over here. Okay. And again, the code, if you look at it, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just like open the test, take a screenshot, and then close the test. Open the test, and then take a screenshot, close it. And even adding items to the cart is the same thing. You will still use Selenium to navigate to that. So you select the item, you add the item to the cart and open the cart. So you're still using Selenium here. And then once that is done, you're going to take a check window. So this is even simpler. Here you are not even bothering about scrolling down and whatnot. You're simply taking, okay, take a screenshot of the viewport, which is this one, 1600 by 800, right? And the same thing for all these other tests. So as you can imagine, not only the code has reduced, it's very simple. So once you know how to write 1 or 2 tests, pretty much all the tests are very similar compared to the other ones. The other thing to note here is that if something changes in this page, you don't have to come back to the code and then maintain the code. Okay, so what you will be doing is you're going to shift the maintenance from maintaining the code to maintaining the screenshot within Amplitude itself. So it's going to be very minimal. It's going to be very simple, but there is still going to be some maintenance work that will be required because your application changes, and so you need to go in there and update the test, update the screenshot itself, right? Either you need to mark it as a failure, or either you need to mark it as a feature, and then do a thumbs up. So let me go back to Amplitude and then show you how this looks like. So what you see here is the test result of all those tests. The first one here is the list, is a screenshot of the entire list, right? So it is scrolled down and it is taken taken screenshot of the entire thing. So notice if I open up this one and show both, so now you're going to see two screenshots. So this is the left-hand side is the baseline, which is the first screenshot that it took, and then the second one is the checkpoint screenshot, which is the current test, the one that I just I ran yesterday, and then it again took the same screenshot. And since both of them are correct, both of them are fine, it's saying it's all good. So now let me show you one more thing here. So I'm going to, so here it is saying as this one is for the dynamic page, right? You may remember. So this thing always changes all the time. So now, but it is saying equals because I've already added something called the ignore region. So I'm going to remove this so I can show you how it looks like. Okay, so now if I do toggle, you could see that the images are different, in both these images, right? So if you were to simply do a DOM-diffing, or if you were to do a screenshot, if you're doing a image pixel by pixel comparison, it would have failed just like this. But there is no way for you to easily go forward. And how do you maintain it, right? And these things can change all the time. So within Amplitude, the nice thing is you can add something called as an ignore region. So what I could do is, let me increase the size a little bit. Let me see. Okay, so let me zoom in a little bit. And then what I could do is I could simply select a box around it and then say, you know what, ignore this whole region. Let me make sure it's correct. So ignore this whole region, and if the similar thing exists in any other step, also ignore those things. So what this does is it's going to now search for similar images where similar difference exists, and it's going to apply this for all those things. So even if you have, let's say, 1,000 tests and something changed, let's say the logo of your application changed, or a terms and condition at the footer has changed, and now you may suddenly find thousands of tests with differences, right? So again, how do you maintain that? So you simply press this button, and then as you can see at the bottom here, what this is going to do is it's going to Amplitude is going to search for similar differences, and then it's going to apply your action on all those thousands of steps, right? It's pretty simple. So you no longer have to worry about updating it, updating 1,000 screenshots. So this is what I mean by maintenance. So now that I have marked this as a ignore region, so now the next step, what I need to do is I'm going to come here and then simply do a thumbs up, saying that okay, this is basically what what I want, and this is the new baseline, and then save this one here. So when I save this, basically what it does is it's going to say, okay, so this is going forward. I'm going to for any new test, I'm going to ignore that region where the user has marked as ignore region, and then I'm going to continue. And then I'm going to continue, and then I'm going to compare the rest of the page, and if there is any difference, I'm going to highlight those things. Okay, so that is that. And then here is an example of the product page where we added the product to the cart, and then here is where we are verifying a functionality here of adding the product to the cart. So now let's imagine that there is a bug here. So let's say something changed here. So what you need to do, if there is a bug, you simply add a region saying that there's a bug here. So you can select here, and you can say, okay, this number, this value is not, say, price is not displayed. So you can do that, and you can fail the test, and then you can do thumbs down, right? So when you do that, what happens is that basically going forward, if the same difference exists, it's going to mark it as a failure. Okay, so that's how easy it is if you to mark anything as a failure. And we also provide lots of tools, such as let's see this one. So this tool allows you to see or filter out all those places where you have issues or remarks, and you can also add things like remarks, annotate like let me go back here. So you can also go back here. Okay, so you can also annotate different things. So suppose your boss or product manager saw something and they can say, hey, why is this is not a bug, we just have a question. You can add a chat here like why this. So you can kind of create a conversation and then somebody else can reply. This is sure. So and then you can chat right inside here. So we provide a lot of tools to manage these screenshots. So in addition to using the AI to to compare it. Okay, so that's a very important thing to know. So the next thing I wanted to highlight here is that you can also do one more thing, which is what we call as the layout mode. So what layout mode does is layout mode also ignores any kind of comparison. So we have different modes. So one of them is called strict mode, which uses algorithms that are like that simulate human eye, and we have this thing called layout mode. So layout mode simply checks if the layout exists. So if you can also run, you can use layout mode when your application is being developed. Okay, this is what I was kind of talking about earlier. So if you use layout mode and then run your tests, then what happens is it will only check for the layout. If there is any problem in the main layout, even if the contents are different internally, it will not highlight it. So that way you can run tests while the application is being developed, and once the application is fully developed, you can switch to strict mode and then create a new baseline from that point on, and then continue your test, right? So hopefully you are kind of getting an idea as to how this works. So there are other cool features. So I'm going to quickly show you the other features here. Let's see. So the other thing is, suppose you ran something in layout mode, but there was a place where you wanted to add a strict mode. You wanted to make sure, let's say, this section of this page to be strict, meaning like it should check. That's a very important thing. So you need to make sure that is not layout mode. So now you can select this, and you can say, you know what, for this page, compare the entire page using layout mode, except for this region, okay, and apply this thing, and apply this into all these other tests, similar tests. So again, you can do all these kind of combinations where a small page or small sections of the page, you can say, hey, compare this using a different layout, a different mode versus one mode versus the other mode. Okay, so hopefully you're getting the idea of what I'm trying to talk about here. And let me show you some more examples. Let's see. So this is another example that I wanted to show you. So here, you don't have to take the screenshot of the entire page all the time. So there may be place where your application is so dynamic, you just want to take a screenshot of a small region. Okay, you don't, because your application is different or kind of changing so rapidly that you can't even maintain. So again, with AppleTools, we provide something called as a check region instead of check window. And then when you do check region, you could basically select a page, and for example, in this page, you wanted to select, check this region. First thing what you do is you come here and you simply kind of create a box around it, and you will know the XY, you will see the XY, W, and H values. So you take these values. You don't need to create an ignore region here. We're just using this to get those coordinates. So once you get those coordinates, you can take that into the code and then say, you know what, AppleTools, don't take the screenshot of the entire page, but simply take a screenshot of this little section, because I know this section is consistent, And as long as this section is consistent, I'm going to assume that my functionality is fine, right? So you can do that as well. All right, so the next one I want to show you is we have this thing called, let me see if I can find it. I want to show you, let me see, I'm going to change it to a different thing here. Okay, so one other thing I want to highlight, this is one of my favorite examples to show all the time, is how good is this, how good is the AI itself, right? So here, so this is, we have a test. I'm going to just toggle it here so you can see. So hopefully you can see this thing. So I'm toggling between the baseline and the new checkpoint image. So notice that there is a lot of things that are moving around, right? This is an example where it highlights, our AI is not highlighting any of them because this is how these images are. The reason is the checkpoint image is being run in IE, whereas the baseline was run in Chrome. So this is a cross-browser testing. And these browsers happen to render them like so. I mean, there is nothing we can do, right? So our AI knows about those things. So it is not highlighting any of them. However, it is highlighting, if you look at this at the bottom right corner, it is highlighting that there is something wrong in the bottom right corner. So now if I zoom in and see that, and then toggle it, notice that in the IE, in the Internet Explorer version, the label is missing in this button. So it knows exactly what to highlight and what not to highlight, right? So this is the main, kind of the crux of the visual AI, where it knows exactly what to highlight and what not to highlight, what to ignore. I mean, this kind of tries to simulate what a human would do, right? And on top of that, we have all these tools that will show you, that will make it easier for you to maintain. Like one of the examples is the grouping examples. So here we have an example GitHub page. So notice here, it is highlighting little, this logo is missing. Again, this is simulated by us. So this logo is missing. Now, what you could do is I could go here and then say, hey, group by similar differences. So when I do that, what it does is the AI is looking for all these steps, and then it is trying to find pages with similar differences, and then it's going to group all of them so you can take group actions. So here, as you can see, it basically grouped all those 36 steps into 2 separate groups. Now you can do thumbs down or thumbs up for the entire group in one click, right? So this is another very cool example. And the other thing I wanted to show is the accessibility feature that we just recently released. So this is another thing where you can click on that accessibility, and then you can see if the contrast ratio is correct, is good enough for this AA or AAA rating. So you can immediately see, if the things are too gray and gray on gray kind of thing, where people cannot see it, so then it's going to tell you those places. Again, you can run all these kind of accessibility tests and whatnot on top of your functional testing. So I guess that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. We have like 5 more minutes. So let me see. I'm trying to go back to the, okay, it's right here. Go back to the webinar. I guess, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me now. We have another 5 minutes to go.
So yeah, sure. We have some questions. Do you want to take them now, Raja?
Yeah, I'm going to take them now.
Okay, perfect. So first one, what would be the best practice for a web app composed of thousands of pages? Would you need a separate test for each page? Would that not cause performance issues?
So if I understand correctly, so you have a web app with thousands of pages, and you're wondering, how long is it going to take the test and whatnot. So one thing to note about this approach is because we are taking screenshots, it is going to be slower than the traditional way because we are taking screenshots and uploading them. But our SDK does them simultaneously in parallel. So as long as if you're, if you're thousands of tests, I'm assuming that you're going to run it in some kind of a cloud environment. So as long as you have, from what we have seen is people never complained about the speed itself. And the best practice is you just run the tests in parallel. Okay, so try to run as many tests in parallel as possible. And as I mentioned earlier, you no longer have to write a lot of tests that you were writing before. So the main thing to take away here is this is a new approach. This is like the difference between a gasoline car versus like an electric car. So there is no longer the traditional engine, right? So there are a lot of differences because of that. There's a lot of difference happens in your day-to-day activity. So one of them is instead of testing small pieces of your page and writing hundreds of tests, you can just eliminate all of them and then write one single test, for the entire page, right? So, but still, you will end up with, if you have a very large application, you will end up with thousands of screenshots. So you will have to take thousands of screenshots. There is no work around that because you're testing all those thousands of screenshots, right? So the main thing is try to run your tests in parallel. And secondly, try to avoid taking duplicate screenshots, right? So if you're already taking a screenshot of a login page once in a certain state, you no longer have to take it again, right? So there's another best practice here.
Next question, Raja.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. My app contains a lot of dynamic actions, for example, drop-down menus and iframes. How would I check them with Apply tools?
Again, the same thing. So glad that you brought up iframes. Let me go back here. So again, for iframes, because you're taking screenshots, you are no longer constrained with the problems with iframes, right? In fact, you will actually find a lot more bugs related to iframes. So the main things about iframe is that, let me see, I'm trying to find it here. I was running a bunch of tests the other day. I can't find it here. Anyway, so I'm just going to give you a high-level thing, but you could check the course on Test Automation EU. By the way, after this one, to get more understanding about this approach, I highly recommend you to go to testautomationeu.com, and that will redirect to this Aptitudes domain, and then take this course. This is the Modern Functional Testing course, so where I talk about all these things, and one of the chapters is about iframe. So in this example, essentially you have multiple iframes. Let me see if it opens up. Maybe yeah. So in this example, you have these 4 different iframes, and so as you can see, I don't know if you can see it. There's a little table here, but the table actually goes beyond this frame, and there is no scroll bar here. So for end users, they can't actually see all the details in this table. And one of the big problems with iframes are all these tables. The scroll bars, where the scroll bars are missing, or there are double scroll bars and whatnot. So, and since you are taking screenshots, what you do is you take a screenshot and then you simply, I showed you how to create a bug. So you simply select that area and then say, what, this scroll bar is missing. And then your developer will know exactly what to find. So that's another benefit of using Aptitudes and pictures, because you're now dealing with pictures. And so it immediately makes it simple for your developer to quickly debug and then fix it, right? So that's another beauty of this. So again, take this course, or just go through this chapter, which is like a few minutes long, and then you will find exactly what I'm talking about. Next question, please.
Question, yeah. Next, how do you handle system-generated pop-ups while screenshots are taken?
I don't understand exactly what you mean by system-generated pop-ups.
System-generated pop-ups that might pop up on your screen while you're testing the page.
Okay, so for example, if it is a JavaScript-based pop-ups where something shows up, some alert shows up or something, you can take screenshots of that. And you have this thing called ignore region that I showed you earlier, or layout mode and whatnot, to ignore those things. If you want to ignore those things, then you can ignore it using ignore region. Or if you think that it is supposed to show up, then then you take screenshot of those things.
Okay, so unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. I want to just mention again that all the questions that we didn't get to will be answered via email early next week. I want to thank everyone that joined us for this live session, and of course, to thank our speaker, Raja Rao. Two quick reminders before Raja will say his goodbyes. Raja's functional testing with visual AI course is now available on Test Automation University. So be sure to check that out, as well as the other great free online courses offered there. And second thing, the link to the recording of this session will be emailed to you by end of day Monday. So I hope to see you all at our next event.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. I hope this was useful. It was not a waste of your time. If you have any questions, feel free to message me. Again, I'm on Twitter. We also have a Slack channel where we have TAU has a Slack channel you can see up here. So if you go to Test Automation U, you can join it here. And I'm very active on that. And you can ask questions over there as well. With that, thank you very much.